Pedagogy. Anybody know what it is? I knew you would know. I won't let you answer. It's a philosophy of teaching. So anybody have a guess on how the atheist uses this against Christians? Okay. What they'll say, let me make sure I'll read it so I don't screw it up. So the skeptic will say something like this. If a loving God wanted people to know Him, ultimate truth would not depend so heavily on who taught you, or where you were born, or when you were born, or what community you were in. It's kind of like it'd be a cultural, geographical argument. You'll see a lot of these overlap. Another version of it might look like this, where they say, human beings are so easy to misteach, manipulate, and indoctrinate. Since belief is so shaped by pedagogy, culture, and unequal access, see how they slip something in? Good teaching, that is, it seems like evidence that there couldn't be a perfectly loving God that has made Himself clear to everyone, because we rely so heavily on who teaches us and where we live. So it's actually a difficult question. Anybody want to try the challenge? These are tough. I mean, what do you say to someone that grew up in a country that doesn't have any Christian teachers, didn't have access to anything? What's the answer? Well, that's very true. Quiet back there. So this is really a form of what we would call the divine hiddenness argument. It's just being repackaged to sound very high and mighty a little bit. But if you think about it, it's like you're defining what a loving God looks like. That makes you above God. Because if you define what God is, that means you know better than God. That makes you the God. You see how the anthropic argument rolls into the atheist view? They become the standard. They're telling you what God should or should not be. So let's look at it. We'll look at it in pieces. There are several different ways to attack this one. You have to kind of work with who you're talking to. The first one that I would use, maybe, it's frozen. We need to differentiate between clarity and coercion. What they're talking about is the fact that pedagogy is really coercive, right? You're manipulating people, you're indoctrinating people. And the first thing we need to ask is, who or what is the standard for our comment on this? If you're coming from the same background that I am, then we can't really make a comment on this because we both have the same background. So it's not relevant to us having a difference of opinion. If the standard is a person, that means there's no standard at all. We know that. A standard has to be outside of yourself in some way. So again, clarity or coercion, I think the atheist would say something like this. He'd say, why do you think a loving God would not make His existence so clear to everyone they could not deny it? And atheists say this. How do you answer them? Any ideas? Well, I think the clear thing is, what makes you say that? Who's getting to define who God is? It's not actually a critique about whether God exists. It's more a critique of whether they like the God that they've imagined in their own head, right? And a lot of these arguments tend to be that way. They're not really evidence against the existence of God. It's evidence against the one they imagined, which didn't exist in the first place. I think they're just looking for an excuse. But another way to attack this one might be something like mediated learning. What I mean by this is a Christian might talk in terms of the fact that we actually believe that revelation comes through people. We believe that we should be involved in our cultural transmission. We believe interpretation and continued guidance is a critical part of our Christian life. So, of course, God would want us to learn that way. If everything came to us suddenly, where's the purpose? Where's the meaning in life? We yearn for growth as humans. So I think the argument that you want everything instantly is an unreasonable argument, and I would actually challenge them to use that same argument against evolution. Why is evolution not clear to everybody, obviously? And where's the proof? They don't like that very much, because they'll sputter and they'll throw something out at you, and then they hope you don't have a PhD in science and can refute them and, whatever else. Okay. Another one, human brokenness, right? Actually, bad pedagogy is something we would predict as Christians. We call it the fallen world, right? It's not a critique on a good God. It's a critique on the bad people and the fact that we often teach things that aren't in line with what God would want. So this argument actually ends up twisting against the atheists and being an argument for the God of the Bible, because it's completely supported by the Bible that we read and we teach, because we believe in this fallenness. And I think as Christians, we believe the world is actually best when we grow together through instruction and correction and studying and learning and patience, sometimes failure, and most importantly, community. That's actually how our worldview works. So this argument against God, once you analyze it, actually is an evidence that the Christian worldview is actually consistent with bad pedagogy. It's bad teaching. But these are philosophical, so slow me down. So that was the easy one. Oh, they steadily get worse. This one's not too bad. Geographical and cultural. And it'll be really similar to what they said for the pedagogy. They'll say something like, a skeptic might say, the fact that religious beliefs is so heavily dependent on the place and time of your birth suggests that gods are products of human culture and indoctrination rather than universal truths. That's actually what they'll say. You guys have all those different gods in religion, because they'll lump us in with all the other religions and say, which God you worship is depending on where you grew up. It's depending on who your family was. And that is true to some extent. So what do we do with this one?
Christianity is all over the world.
You got it. If you've ever read the book Tactics by Greg Koukl, I would use one of his methods, and I would say, so what's your point? The Christian worldview agrees with that. We accept people from every demographic and culture. We don't discriminate against anybody. We believe that regardless of where you started, it's the final that really matters. And it's unlike most other worldviews. The Christian worldview is literally open to people from any way of life, age, gender, nationality, color of skin, you name it. Atheist worldview, it's survival of the fittest. They could not care less about this. So why are they arguing using it when their worldview doesn't care? Or if you look at other religions in the world, they're all inward looking. Most are only concerned about their group. They don't care what a group from another culture is doing. Christian missionaries will go and help Muslims. They'll go and help Hindus. They'll go and help whoever. We are outward looking because this does not matter in our worldview. So arguing against Christianity using a worldview that's actually consistent with Christianity, philosophically it sounds really good until you look at it and realize it's like, well, it's actually, again, it's the opposite. So that's the easy two. Parsimony, Occam's razor. Anybody heard of this before? It's a philosophical perspective. It basically says the simpler explanation is usually preferred over a more complex one. It's a guidance in making decisions, basically. If you add extra stuff on to an idea, you get rid of those. You try to pare it down to the bare minimum that still explains just as well. So that's Occam's razor. So it sounds really scientific, And the scientists will use it like it's scientific, but this is 100% philosophical. So here's the argument against God. We should not multiply entities beyond what is necessary, or the necessity. Natural explanations already account for what we see. Therefore, adding God is unnecessary. You hear this all the time if you listen to scientists talk. We don't need that extra thing. Naturalism, evolution, explains everything. What do we do with this? You're going to hear this in school if you go to public school. You go to college, you'll hear it in philosophy classes and in science classes. We must be prepared to answer this, and this is not easy. Let me make it a little simpler. Instead of saying God did it, it is simpler to say the universe exists and operates by the impersonal laws we call, the laws of nature, right? Sounds really philosophical and scientific, and how do you address that? Every atheist you find on TV and YouTube is going to use this argument.
It's perfectly done.
It is? Good argument?
Perfectly done to such an extent that it's so aligned absolutely perfectly. If any one of the buttons off, none of it would work.
So true.
But does that prove there's a God?
Well, what I think the problem with this method or this argument is it kind of appeals to our nature a little bit, because we have a fallen nature, and our instincts are like, it sounds like it makes sense, right? Because it's a philosophical rule. We shouldn't invent things that we don't need. So if the lightning strikes and we can explain it with physics, we don't need to say God made it happen, because physics made it happen. That's how they would kind of give you an example. So what do we do? It does seem like in their view that God is unnecessary.
Who controls physics?
Very good.
What is the universe?
Yeah, very good.
I mean, that goes back to Aristotle, right? The whole, what brought everything into motion. Like, if there are these impersonal laws, right, how did the laws come into existence? Like, what was the cause that caused all of these events?
Yeah, the first cause, the unmoved mover.
Descartes, and that's somebody they bring up a lot too, right? They'll say, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And it's like, well, you're not understanding what he was saying with that statement itself.
Because you're thinking in the first place, right?
God has to exist, and it's because I can cut away everything else, but I cannot cut away the fact that I know I did not create myself.
So actually, along that same lines, first place to start is simpler is not always truer. Simpler is just simpler. Okay, this is a philosophical rule. It is not a yes or no answer. I mean, let me give you an extreme example. Our meal today could have just magically appeared because it's all natural, right? It's all made out of biological things we can find. Or it could have been planned, right? Now, which is simpler? But it just showed up by magic, right? It's this one thing. But it took a lot of phone calls and text messages, and people had to go to the store and bring me ice cream. That is actually the better explanation, but it's not really simpler in this type of philosophy. So I think that the Christian can take this and just say something like this. If God explains features in reality that naturalism cannot, then God is not unnecessary. It appears that he might be the better explanation. And in fact, naturalism cannot explain very many things. They think they can, but they always stop before they actually get to the explanation. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through. Another way to approach this is there's a difference between the ultimate and an extra. Now, the atheist is going to talk about the universe as the universe and energy and matter and all those natural laws, and then you Christians are adding God on top of all of that. But see, the Christian will say, no, God is the reason for all those things. He's not some add-on. He is the ultimate explanation for each and every one of those things, and actually the only explanation for those things. So again, they want the cluttered add-on. We say, well, without God, there is nothing to clutter in the first place. But this is the one that I see most often, is this idea that natural laws may describe things, but they don't fully explain things. And the atheist is going to challenge this a little bit. Well, let me hold that for a second. Let me expand on this just a little bit. The reason I would say this is I think as a Christian, we should argue that God explains things that naturalism can't. Things like why things exist in the first place, right? Why the universe is so ordered. Why can I actually think instead of just random thoughts? Pete?
Well, naturalism, too, it just describes average things, right? It describes things that we see, like, repeatedly. But it's not going to describe a one-off event, what they call, like, a black swan event in science. Like, just because you see an earthquake in California all the time doesn't mean that an earthquake can't happen in Texas, because you don't oftentimes see earthquakes happen in Texas, right? Like, these events can still happen. They're not going to be explained by these natural laws that we think that we see. That's because the natural laws only describe the average. That's something you learn in data analysis, right?
Right.
It's standard deviations. So yeah, the standard deviation, 70% might be explained, but what about that other 30% that is not going to be average? That's why we don't aspire towards average dispersion.
And that's really the fallacy of parsimony or Occam's razor, because simple does not always mean correct. It just means it's simpler. That's really what it means. And in some cases, it's a good guide. But let's look at it this way. God is simpler than many brute facts. A naturalist claim is actually not a claim. It's lots of claims. Okay, they have to have all those natural laws. They have to be perfectly tuned for life. They have to have billions of years, and they have to have all these things. They actually have a very complex sequence of events that have to happen perfectly, randomly, which is, those two words don't actually work together, perfectly and randomly. So God actually is a simpler argument, but they will use something like this. And again, I don't think of Occam's razor as a proof, but really it's a guide. But they're going to challenge us this way. I didn't find in my notes. I want to say this. They will say that, naturalism explains so many things that used to be attributed to the divine entity, right? And then they're going to throw out examples, and we better be prepared. The common one now would be origins of life. So let's say science has explained origins of life. Science can explain why the planets orbit the sun and all those things. Science and physics explains all of that. It actually doesn't. Well, origins of life is very contested. We'll talk about that another time. Did you know that you have no idea how the Earth orbits the sun? There's not an astrophysics guy in the universe that can explain it. You know what the three best arguments are right now? Well, actually, there's four. There's maybe four. The first one is there is an invisible ninth planet that adds gravity to the solar system that allows us to orbit the way we do. Because there's some force holding things together that we don't know about in science. So it's this invisible ninth planet. Or they'll use dark energy, or they'll use dark matter, all to try to account for this magical force that we know in science exists, but we can't see it. And then I heard a new one. It's just as I think it's on Monday. Some guy has come up with this idea that all that extra stuff is really leaking into our universe from a parallel universe. You know what all these ideas have in common? They're not science. They're science fiction. They're good imaginations, but the imaginations, because God is not a possibility in their worldview, so they have to imagine something that can make up for what we already know as Christians, the thing that holds the universe together